one thing I always noticed, and like the contractors, ran off with half their deposit and never to be seen again. You still have to pay the mortgage. Tenant moved in, paid the first and last and the security deposit, but then it hasn't paid anything since. You still have to pay the mortgage. And a lot of the rentals, especially in Florida where I was at the time, if you cleared 100 and $150 a door like that month, that was a great rental. I mean, it's just not a really strong cash flowing market in most of
Yeah.
Florida. All the landlords I knew, it always seemed like a game of, hope and God, hope and pray that they pay for that month. You keep your fingers crossed for 30 days that nothing major breaks. And then, once the first rolls around, you do it again. But then at the same time, I was working for this hard money lender where he was routinely cashing checks anywhere between $700 and $2,000, and that's interest only payments. And I was like, okay,
Mm,
yeah, I'm doing something wrong here.
sounds nice.
Yeah, right.
You're listening to the Gorilla State Investing Podcast. We're not here to bruise your bananas with guru sales pitches, overrated fluff, or any other kind of monkey business. We simply provide the ground-pounding truth about what it takes to be successful in real estate.
All right, guys, today's guest is Alexandria Breshears. And I got to be honest, I started talking with Alexandria and the conversation was so good that I forgot to do an intro. We were literally just rolled right into talking about real estate stuff. And by the time I had realized we had talked about stuff that was so good for the podcast, it was too late for me to stop and redo that. So I'm actually doing this introduction separately because of how good the conversation with Alexandria was. So I want to go ahead and preface you guys with that. And Alexandria, she's a private money lender out of Virginia, and she also operates short-term rentals and does crowdfunding operations, as well as being an educator. She started private money lending when she opened up her company, Infinite Road Investments. She did that in 2020, and she lends to residential fix and flippers in the Hampton Roads, Virginia area. So if you're in Hampton Roads and you're a contractor, a fix and flipper looking for private money, Alexandria is your girl. She started a educational platform on Facebook, and it's called Private Lending Lessons. And it's a good group. It's very active. It's very well branded. Alexandria does a good job of engaging and posting and keeping the conversation going. And in fact, I actively post on her platform. I consume a lot of the information because private lending is not necessarily my niche in real estate, but I do love the idea of it and how passive it can be. So the conversation that she and I have it goes all over the place. We talk about a lot of different stuff. In fact, I forgot I was recording a podcast at one point and started screen sharing a hotel deal that I had under contract or that we've since closed on. So it's going to be a real raw conversation between her and I. It's a long one. It's a good one. It's full of content. I hope you enjoy, and let's go ahead and take Alexandria on the show. Yeah. So you said you're a women's accountability group
Yes.
exclusive to women. I can't join. A sexist. I'm just
I
kidding.
don't think they'd say anything, but you'd be the only dude in the room.
Yeah. What do you guys do? Is it specific to real estate or just life in general?
There's a lot of real estate focus, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's 100% real estate, all the time. It's really about being able to get together, do some networking, connect with other resources that we might have in our network. So if, someone comes up that week and says, I need someone to do digital graphics for my, Facebook group or whatever it happens to be, I can say, hey, does anybody know or have good experience with someone who does Facebook graphics? I need a contact, I need a connection. So it's really a lot of that. And then the other component is the accountability where you're basically declaring to the group, hey, this is what I'm going to get done this week. And then you show up obviously next week and you have to report in, did you get this done? Why and why not? And it's not necessarily in a negative way, like, oh, you didn't get
Yeah.
this done, but it's really, it's that quintessential thing. People will most likely do something for someone else before they'll do it for themselves. So it just adds that component to your business life.
I agree. Before I tell you about what something similar I was in, I want to say your glasses are awesome, and I wish
Oh,
my
thank you.
gorilla was wearing those glasses because they're pretty close.
Right? That's why I said I loved your logo.
Yeah, I get a screenshot. My wife can do what Photoshop pretty well. I might get her to change the glasses out. Those are cool. But yeah, I was part. Me and a couple of buddies was part of a book club, and if you'd asked me when I was, in my young 20s, if I'd ever thought I'd be in a book club, no, I'd never thought I would be. But it was pretty much what you're describing, just accountability. Like the book club was the conduit to establish
Hmm.
relationships, and we had like six up to like eight guys, I think, of just people that back in Louisiana where I grew up were some
No
sort of
way.
business related. Yeah, and so one guy was like the head coach of the college there. Another guy was in the oil industry. Me and my partner were in the real estate and the sporting industry. It was just cool because we all knew each other somewhat, but we would had a book that we would read. Each of us would call one another once, one-on-one conversation before the group conversation, and then we would kind of have to report, hey, this is what I learned about this guy, it's what we shared, and then everybody would go through and talk about the book. And to be honest, it was right when COVID just got started, so everybody was looking for something to do while they're home. But at the moment, like people started going back to work, it kind of just like fell off. But it was
Yeah.
really good whenever it happened. Just to get like network with people and bounce ideas off of somebody who had a specialty outside of your own. So I like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you probably recognize the city behind me then.
That's New Orleans Bridge is right
That's New
there?
Orleans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you from, Louisiana?
Yeah.
What part?
I grew up in Slidell.
Slidell, Louisiana. I grew up in Lake
That's
Charles.
right. All right. I love it out there.
Look at that. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I close in June 1st. We close on this little hotel that I'm buying, me and some friends. I'm buying it from a friend of mine. It's outside of Lake Charles and Lake Arthur. Have you ever heard of Lake Arthur?
Hmm.
So it's like the only hotel in Lake Arthur. It's like 8 rooms. It's tiny, but it used to be a bank. And friends of mine, actually a girl that was my wedding, her mom and dad took it and like completely renovated it into like a little bitty like boutique hotel. It's adorable. Let me share my screen real quick. I'll show it to you. It's like an adorable little hotel. I fell in love with it when they were doing, but I never thought I'd be buying a hotel. And then here I am buying a
Oh, I know.
hotel.
I have short-term rentals now. It's just, I mean, a whole different world.
I love it. Yeah, I have quite a few short-term rentals back in Panama City. Let me share a
Yep.
screen. I'll show you. I'm host disable participant screen sharing. Can you
Oh, did it not?
allow me to share screen?
Yeah. I figured it would have.
Yeah, I thought it gave me
There, I'll make a co-host. That should allow you to do everything.
there we go. Check this guy out. All right, so this used to be it's called La Banque Albergo, but it's that's French fancy French New Orleans for the bank
Yep.
hotel. But if you look at it,
Yep.
it looks like a New Orleans style
It really
design.
does with the railings and the black railings and the
Yeah.
little thin wood shutters.
Yeah, there's actually like a fleur de lis, like half of this picture you can see painted over there. And
Oh my
then
gosh.
this is the front where there's still a vault. The vault door is still
Oh,
there. And then
wow.
the back they have wine racks. They call it the wine vault. I think they stopped serving wines, 8 people, or 8 rooms. It's not really
Right.
enough to economy of scale to do that. But there, let me see some of these pictures. Trying to find this room right here. This is the drive-through where the bank teller used to stand.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, and so this is a backup vault. So inside the room, they have a vault and the drive-through window that's still there. I'm like, this is so cool. This is so unique.
But that's
And
what people want in properties like that. They want a story.
exactly. And that's I fell in love with so multifamily is like my bread and butter. But I don't want to say get bored with it, but it is not as fun as some of the projects I've been looking at in the short term industry because I really do like making things unique.
Yep.
I do that in Panama City, where I bought a 7 unit apartment complex and then I renovated it from from unit 1 to 7, right? And you could literally, like, if you looked at unit 1 all the way down the line to 7, you could tell that I got a lot better at renovating. Like, unit 1 is like just
That's a throwaway
there's,
pancake.
yeah, there's thresholds everywhere. There's like everything's held together by caulk and masking tape. But by the time I got to unit like 5, I was rocking and rolling, and honed in my skills. But anyway, so I was renting those out long term, and then eventually somebody came into my life who's now my property manager and manages everything. She was not a property manager back then. She was just a tenant of mine, who wanted to help me. And one of the first people in my life that came to me and says, "Hey, how can I help you do what you're doing better?" And I was like, what's in it for you? And she's like, well, like, just I'm looking for work. I'm fresh out of a divorce. I'm starting over. What ended up happening is she rented one of my units, but then she had met someone and was staying at his house and never really staying the night in the unit. And she was like, I'd like to rent this out short term because it's furnished, it's clean, and I don't ever stay here. And I was like, tell me the negatives. She's like, the negatives are it's going to get cleaned like 3 times a week, and you'll get market rent and blah blah blah. I was like, you didn't tell me any negatives. So I let her do it, and then now all 7 of them are rented out short term, and it's peak summer, make like
Yep.
3 times what I would make on long term rentals, so it's awesome.
Yep.
And she does all the work. But yeah, anyways, enough about me. Tell me about yourself. Like, I understand you're like into private lending. Sounds like you're into real estate investing as well. Like, what's your jam?
So I am a military spouse of about 20 years. My spouse is a active duty service member currently stationed in Norfolk on his way to Italy in a couple months.
Ooh.
And I'm currently sitting my 19th address in 20 years. So
Mhm.
we have boogied all over the country. And that obviously makes what most people consider real estate investing rather difficult if you're only going to live somewhere for 3 months or 6 months at a time, or somewhere totally remote like Kodiak Island, Alaska. You're not doing real estate investing in Kodiak Island, Alaska.
Yeah.
So it basically necessitated my lifestyle, necessitated my investing style. I mean, I think most people kind of end up going the other way around. And I had no choice, because if I wanted to keep my family together, I had to find a way to invest that didn't necessarily require me geographically to be in one particular area for any length of time. So, I think most people see the HGTV, fix and flip shows, and they know about landlording and having tenants and whatnot as a way of investing. But that we tried both of those, we didn't like it. We refused to do it again. But I had worked for a hard money lender years and years and years ago when I first got involved in real estate, and I did a lot of his back office stuff. And part of that was processing the payments that came in every month, those interest only payments that everybody
Yeah.
gripes about making to your hard money lender. And, one thing I always noticed, and like, if the contractors, ran off with half their deposit and never to be seen again, you still have to pay the mortgage. A tenant moved in, paid the first and last and the security deposit, but then it hasn't paid anything since. You still have to pay the mortgage. And a lot of the rentals, especially in Florida where I was at the time, if you cleared 100 and $150 a door like that month, that was a great rental. I mean, it's just not a really strong cash flowing market in most of
Yeah.
Florida. And, it just, all the landlords I knew, it always seemed like a game of, hope and God, hope and pray that, they pay for that month. You keep your fingers crossed for 30 days that nothing major breaks. And then, once the first rolls around, you do it again. But then at the same time, I was working for this hard money lender where he was routinely cashing checks anywhere between $700 and $2,000. And that's interest only payments.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, yeah, I'm doing something wrong here.
Yeah.
So,
Sounds nice.
yeah, right.
You
So
didn't have to swing a single hammer.
so when we kind of settled down a little bit here in Virginia, we talked about we need to get back into investing, because now my spouse has hit that, magic 20-year point in the military that everybody thinks there's just these kind of golden handcuffs that break and you're free. But he's in it for a little bit longer. But it's still, we're talking about having that conversation of, going from a military family, that's all we've ever known, that's all we've ever been, to being a civilian family. Once he does get out, what do we want that to look like? And what we want that to look like involves a lot of travel, a lot of geographical freedom, like we've already had. And to do that, again, we had to necessitate a style of investing that allowed us to do that. So enter, private lending. COVID actually kind of spurred us on a little faster than we were originally planning, because at the very beginning of COVID, a lot of hard money lenders literally just shut their doors.
Yeah.
About, I would say end of March here in Virginia, they literally just, they would call borrowers up and say, "Hey, I know you got a closing tomorrow, but that's not happening."
Oof.
And it's so, it just ended up working out that the active investors in the community, other active duty service members, they had loans, or they had deals that basically were supposed to go out on hard money loans. And then suddenly they're left in the lurch. They're supposed to be closing in 2 days, in a week. And then suddenly it's like, nope, sorry, that's not happening. So it really kind of, just through mutual connections, it just kind of spurred on this desire to, let's, what's better than doing it right now? So we got the paperwork together, got attorneys involved, and then actually started doing lending as a business, as opposed to just kind of one of, if we knew someone that needed capital, yeah, sure, we'll work with you, kind of thing. And it just became more formal and, an actual business last year during COVID.
So what is your ideal customer or ideal project that you like to lend to?
So we lend only on fix and flips and Hampton roads that are in school districts that have 6 out of 10 or better as far as their rankings go. Usually ARVs are anywhere between about 250 and I'd say 325, because that makes it fairly affordable for the large military community that's here. They're in good school districts. They have to be within about 10% of the average square footage of the neighborhood, and they have to be within about 10% of the average median home price for that zip code. So we obviously don't want, the biggest, nicest neighborhood in an area where it's not so great. And we don't want the biggest, nicest house in a, neighborhood where everything's 1,500 square feet, but the one you're buying is, 2,500 square feet. That could potentially cause a problem, when you're trying to establish an ARV or even sell it.
That is a very specific market and type. So you're the second lender I've talked to who's like, this is the area I lend in, and this is why I lend there. Whenever I think about, because I see on Facebook a lot of like private lenders being like, "Hey, we're lending private money to like a barrage of people." And the last guy I talked to, his name's Jaspreet. You probably know him. I think he's
Yeah,
in
he's in
your
my
group.
group.
Yeah,
Yep.
he's like, "Look, man, good hard money lenders don't have to advertise that they're hard money
No.
lenders. Like, people come to
Yeah.
them because they know it. They lend in that area. So why do you pick a specific area, and a specific asset class, to lend to?
There's a couple different reasons. Primarily, most private lenders are going to lend in a specific market, potentially, 2 or 3 cities, but they are usually always in the same state. And that is because of the laws that are required. You have to meet certain guidelines, certain regulations for both lending and on the side of, potentially licensing, if you need to be a licensed mortgage broker, for example. And then each state and sometimes municipalities have what's called usury laws, which are the upper limits of, what you can charge as far as fees and interest rates and the terms under which you can lend. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of variables there. So if you go through the cost of having, your documents, deed of trust, for example, here in Virginia, if you have a promissory note and a deed of trust that is all kind of pitched, ready to go for Virginia, and then someone, reaches out to you from Georgia and says, "Hey, I want a loan, for this rental property in Georgia." I don't know anything about lending in Georgia. I could tell you what lending in general looks like, but I don't know what the usury laws are. I don't know what the lending laws are. I don't even know if it's legal for me as a Virginia resident to lend in Georgia. So I would have to go through that time, that expense of getting docs prepared for Georgia laws. It's a whole thing. So from that perspective, that's usually what limits a lot of private capital, is the laws that are just local to what they know. So, for example, Jaspreet's in California, but he lends in Indianapolis,
Yeah.
but he knows the laws in both of those states to be able to do that legally.
Yeah, because
So
I've asked him twice, "Hey, can I get money in Florida?" He's like, "I don't lend there, man." I'm like,
yeah.
"Well, I'm gonna keep asking until you give me money." He's like, "Keep on asking, but it's not gonna happen."
Right. Right. So
That's
I
interesting.
do know a couple in Florida. So if you need a connection, I can make a connection for you.
I do for sure, because that's where
Okay.
we operate out of. In fact, we're closing on a 10 unit in Florida this Friday that we had to pay all cash for. And this is all cash from the guys buying it. And we're gonna stabilize it and then refi out of it. Pretty much the Burr strategy on it. This is the
Hmm.
first time I've ever made an all cash offer, and it sounded a lot like what everybody is having to do to win the bids. And it was
Yep.
all cash. We get one walkthrough, all cash, over asking, no contingencies, closing in 7 days. My head was on fire when I sent that offer out because I'm like, this is so it's ridiculous. But
Yeah.
the thing that I learned is that having that capital, even though it was like at the max of our ability to purchase it all cash, the four guys that are in it, um, having that cash lined up on the front end just gives you so much agility to be able
Hmm.
to quickly close and win bids, especially in today's environment where there's so many cash. Even the seller said this. So there's so many cash buyers out there. I'm not taking any offers that have a financing contingency. And I was like, Jesus, man, like, okay, all right. And we sent it. We sent our highest and best. And for the first time, it was like, this is no kidding, our highest and best, bro. Like, this isn't what we think we can get the property for. The least, no, this is exactly what we can pay. And maybe we were 20 or 30 grand over the next offer, but based on the numbers and the market, it works for us. So we we had to pull the trigger so we can get one. But yeah, so if you could help me out in understanding, somebody approaches you for a loan, what do they need to have a track record of some sort? Do they need to have a project already lined up, or do they come to you and say, "Hey, this is what I do. This is what I look for. Can we get pre-approval?" And that way, I have the ability to close on something quickly.
I would say it works equally well in both ways. So, kind of the blessing and the curse of private lending is its flexibility. So, the way I do something isn't necessarily reflective of the way every private lender out there is going to do something. But generally, it's a relationship business. It's not going to be something where you like dial up a 1-800 number and, hey, what's your rates for me? It's very much a relationship business. So, for example, I only work with usually 3 or 4 investors here in my local market, and they keep me plenty busy with the capital. If I had more capital, I'd give them more because they have more projects than I can fund, and they're just good, solid investors. But all of those investors came to me not even really seeking capital, just, "Hey, I'm a local investor in the community. I'm out looking to meet other investors in this particular community." They happen to all have some affiliation with the military, so we kind of have that tie as well. And then it just kind of naturally evolved to, "Hey, I'm looking to purchase this, single family home. Are you are interested in lending on a single family home?" Like, "Yeah, where is it?" "No, it's this part of town. I'm going to hold it for a burr." "Nah, I'm not really comfortable being in a longer term, process, project, especially during COVID, the way the lending standards have been for non-owner occupied property." If you come up with something that you're going to turn around and sell, then sure, let's have that conversation. So it really, in my opinion, it starts with building that relationship and finding out what they actually fund. And then if that's something that you routinely go after, you can let them know and stay on their radar and say, "Hey, I'm out looking for a deal actively. I'm expected to have one in 2 to 3 weeks. If I do, can I kind of rely on you to provide the capital? Are we good?" You can have those conversations. Some private lenders, might not do that, but I think for the most part, most of the private lenders that I personally know, they are very much in that relationship model. So they would rather hold on to the capital and kind of allocate it for people that they know, like, and trust versus, they just want the next opportunity to get it out the door and earning interest.
Yeah, I'm 100% that mindset. I like to do business with people that I like. In fact, a broker, an agent, a lender, if I don't like them, if I don't enjoy a conversation with them, I'm not. I don't want to do business with. It's just I will go
Yeah.
with a higher price person that makes my day more enjoyable than I will for the cheapest person who's just a pain in the butt. And it's true. Like my current agent in Panama City, Florida. I call it, like, if there's a deal that comes on the market, I'll see it within 10 seconds and I'll call him and I'll give him crap about not sending it to me. He's like, I don't even know it's on the market. I'm like, bro, why am I doing your job right now? But at the end of the day, when it comes down to who's going to have my back, like, I know that that guy's got my best interest in mind every time. There's no doubt about it. So I'm 100% that mindset. One thing that I'm learning right now that I 100% didn't know was that it sounds like lending is like just as local as anything in real estate. I thought it was more of like a national thing, where, hey, I've got money to lend. I'm looking for people to lend it to. I've talked to a couple guys out here in California, and they seem to be a bit more national, probably because they realize that lending in California is not quite as easy. So they've had to be trained to finding people like in Texas and Florida and some of the hotter markets. Doesn't mean that that's translated into a loan yet, but I'm building the relationships with them, and kind of introducing them to my style of investing, which I will say, a lot of lenders are not really into. Like, I've been trying to buy multiple of these smaller boutique style hotels. We closed on one in June, and we were under contract for one that ended up, the lending fell through because of a hurricane. Actually, hurricanes have ruined a lot of things lately for me. But the guy that I was talking to the other day, he's a local to California. He's a lender, and he sounds like a surfer. He's like, Ramsey, what do you got going on, man? Like, I'm like, dude. But I send him stuff, and he's like, man, you have an affinity for trying to buy these little motels, man. I was like, yeah, I like them. He's like, well, I don't. Shit. We go talk to some. You know someone who does, like, but
And I would also say some of that ambiguity you're seeing is kind of the mismatch in terminology. So when I say private lender, I'm talking about individuals, maybe they lend out of an entity like an LLC, but for the most part, they're lending either their own capital or capital that they directly have some control over. So when you're
yeah,
talking to a private lender, in my eyes, you're talking to someone who's the processor, the underwriter, the decision maker. They're the ones cutting the checks.
yeah,
Now, since private money seems to have that really positive connotation, and then hard money tends to have that kind of negative connotation, what I'm seeing more and more is a lot of people that are effectively hard money lenders, but they're calling themselves private money. And so what you're seeing is these business entities that they either have potentially a warehouse line of credit with a big bank, they have some sort of agreement for the loans to be purchased through maybe some hedge fund out of New York. Maybe they're doing white label funding, so they're actually officially kind of a fancy broker for, some other like Peer Street, for example, but they're calling themselves private money, but they in reality are more operating more. Their business model is 100% a hard money lender. Whereas through private lenders, it's their capital or capital they have control over. And it sounds like a really small distinction, but downstream, it has very large implications. So in your case, you've already experienced some of them. So private lenders tend to have more flexibility. So if a deal doesn't check all the particular boxes, you don't have a 680 credit score, it's not at 65 ARB, it's too old, it's too new, it's made of wood, whatever their kind of parameters are, since they are the ones turning around and selling the loan, or maybe they got that warehouse line of credit underneath these guidelines that say thou shall only lend out our money to these types of borrowers for these types of properties and these types of states. If you as a borrower don't check all those boxes, then they can't do the loan.
hmm,
Whereas when you're talking to a private lender, in my eyes, what I call a private lender, you have that more relationship. So if it doesn't check all the boxes, you can almost kind of fall back on that relationship and go, look, we've done 10 of these before together. What's your hesitation about this one deal? And you say, oh, well, everything you've done up to this point's been 10 units and this is 25. I don't know how you're going to handle doubling the units, in one particular project. That's what I'm a little, you know what I mean? So that flexibility can actually work for you in those cases when you're talking to people that are true private lenders.
yeah, because it's your money, so you get to decide what risk you're going to take, right? So
Yeah.
if that's where the relationships have to come into play, because if you trust that person can make it, then you can lend them that money because it's your risk to assume, but you can't assume that risk. I'm good. So what you're saying about private money, it sounds like somebody who's got an amazing line of credit or a track record, and they can go to a bank and pull out a big line of credit at 4% and turn around and lend at 8%. Is that essentially what's happening?
That's essentially what's happening. If it, or they're tapping into like a HELOC, maybe they're loaning out of a a IRA, self-directed IRA, so they're using retirement money. So obviously, in that case, they might be an active investor, but you can't actively invest in your own deals. So they'll be an active investor, but they'll use the IRA money to lend out to other active investors. So they're also private lending as well.
So all of the loans that you're given is you and your husband's private capital. So you have the
Yes.
ability, you have the flexibility to make decisions on what you do and don't want to do. It doesn't really matter as long as it meets your criteria, correct?
Yes.
So, and you guys have really started diving into this deep since COVID kicked off, or how long have you been doing it?
I would say off and on for probably over the span of about 10 years. We would just do, maybe one a year, maybe one every other year. It just mattered where we were stationed and who we knew while we were stationed there. Because obviously, trying to do a private money loan for a first lien position in San Diego when we were stationed there, you're
Yeah.
you're not buying anything in San Diego for under about 700,000. So that was, back then especially, that was way out of our ability to lend in that particular market. So while we were stationed there, we just didn't do any. But when COVID came about and we started seeing this massive need for true private money, because all those hard money lenders, their capital is dictated by a third party entity, not them.
Okay.
So at
Okay.
any point, the reason they had to shut their doors is because their warehouse lines of credit closed. The hedge funds, there was just so much uncertainty with where the economy was going to be going. Were we going to be, are we heading towards a precipice in real estate because the economy is going to tank? I mean, GDP was down, 33% in one quarter kind of thing. So if you're not talking to the decision maker about the capital and it's not their capital to lend, that's the ramifications further downstream that you see as a borrower when you're talking about the difference between private money and what I would call hard money.
Good use of the word precipice, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm impressed by your impressibus. Well, okay, so let me ask you this: when interest rates started to drop for like once things started coming around, interest rates dropped substantially. So the cost of money is really cheap right now. Has that affected your business and what you're able to lend out, or you have your criteria and people still meet it?
Because we are basically not direct competitors with the conventional lending standards, we've seen nothing but increased demand for private capital. Because those interest rates that you're talking about that are tied to, LIBOR or some T-bill index or something like that, that's for, large conventional lending standards. Those are owner occupied homes, usually, those are mom and pop moving in, living there type of properties.
Okay.
Most private lenders, I personally can't think of a single one that does, but they do not lend on owner occupied property because it's a whole separate bank of rules and regulations for owner occupied property versus investment property. So when you're talking about going to the bank and getting those, 2% loans, chances are that's going to be, something that's owner occupied. Even the commercial side is seeing, high threes, low fours, but those tend to be longer loans. They have to be for stabilized assets unless you're doing something like a bridge loan. But most private money is going to be shorter term. For example, my loans are usually only out 4 to 6 months. The average is going to be anywhere between, I'd say, 8 and 12 months. Occasionally, you'll come across somebody who'll do, 18 month, something like that for a property that needs massive renovation. So I mean, it's two completely different products in the marketplace. So whatever conventional lending is doing tends to not have too much of a bearing on what private money is doing.
Okay. Yeah, it's two different product lines essentially,
Mhm.
right? And I guess in the fix and flip world, interest rates being low means that you are in more demand because people are willing to fix and flip because they can sell the houses really quickly, right? So I guess it's
Absolutely.
helped you quite a bit. That makes perfect sense. Well, I want to switch and talk about if I'm interested in being a note investor or a private lender, right? What would you say would be how much capital you need to have in the bank to get started?
Realistically, you could probably start with 30 to 50,000. There's still markets in the United States where you could be in a first lien position. Indianapolis is a great example of where Jaspreet invests. you could get a first lien there for $50,000, so it really doesn't have to be something where you start with, $500,000. It just really depends on what your risk tolerance is. So if you are not comfortable investing out of your local area, you could venture into something that's called gap funding or second lien position. Obviously, there's going to be more risk, so I wouldn't necessarily start there.
Yeah.
But it is a possibility. I like to let people know their options, and then they can make their decisions based on their preferences and risk tolerance. But you could potentially start with there, and you don't even necessarily have to be solely in the second lien position. You could potentially do something where you're a JV partner with somebody, and you're the capital partner, and they are the more active side of the equation where they're managing the contractors, for example, if you're funding a fix and flip. So you could start easily, I think, with $50,000 and then gain access to credit, business lines of credit, maybe a HELOC, something like that. You can start talking with friends and family. If, basically you could do arbitrage, say, hey, this is what I'm doing. If I pay you 7%, and then you're going to turn around and charge other people 12 or 16%, for that money, you're making that difference in that yield spread.
Okay. Okay. And so if you have the capital to get started, I'm guessing the first place, pick your market, right? And then get your legal paperwork set up for that area to make sure that you're able to lend legally, correct?
Yes.
How do you find people that one that are doing it, and two that you trust to lend money to?
It's really going back to that relationship building. So, for example, if you want to lend in a specific market and you want to lend on these specific types of properties, then, especially now that you're starting to see more events in person, if that property is or that community is local to you, just going to a local RIA meeting and just, talking to people, who's doing fix and flips in this particular market, who's doing, if you have a part of town, for example, who's doing fix and flips on the west side, and just start hearing and listening to the buzz. Do more listening than talking at these RIA meetings, and you'll gain a wealth of information. And just start talking to people. Real estate has the benefit of having kind of what I call the real estate underground. It's similar to the Cajun underground since you're from Louisiana, where word spreads like wildfire. It's a small community. So, people, your reputation is your business in a lot of places. Especially if you are investing in a small local market. So if you start hearing kind of the same thing about people, oh yeah, this person screwed a past partner out of money, or, they moved into a rental and then declared bankruptcy, so all these little
Child.
things. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like,
Can't be doing
your
that.
your reputation really gets around. So you can always start asking people. I actually ask borrowers for professional references. And then I talk to those professional references. And then I go at the next step and I ask those references for other people who have done business with my potential borrower.
Okay.
And that second tier of people is really where you tend to get the greatest amount of information, more accurate information, shall we say.
Okay. So I've got my $50,000. I want to lend it out to a fix and flipper. I've gone and identified my market. I'm legal, established a relationship with this person. You said you typically do your money is out for 4 to 6 months, correct?
Yes.
All right. So I'm guessing you have like a promissory note template or a loan application process. This is what part of the legal side was getting set up. You want your money out 4 to 6 months. Do you typically see or do you charge points up front? Do you do early payment penalties? What's your average interest rate? Is that based on, I know I'm asking a lot of questions. Is that based on investor experience? Does it fluctuate based on the risk that you do? Like, kind of walk me through how you look at this and how you make that decision.
So I look at this more as a team effort. I'm a real estate investor just like they are a real estate investor. So I need a return and they also need a return. So for example, since I fund fix and flips, anybody who's ever done a fix and flip will tell you, you are hemorrhaging money for the first couple months you own that fix and flip. So what I do is I say, okay, since the loan is such a short period of time, because I don't fund anything that needs massive renovation, especially during COVID, because they've had such a problem with supply chain issues and just backlog of materials. So So if the loan's so short, what I'll do is I'll just up the interest rate a couple points, and then you can pay everything at the payoff instead of making monthly payments kind of as we go. I have yet to have a borrower turn that down because it's solving a problem for them. It's, stopping a little bit of the hemorrhaging each month, but at the same time, it's I have that faith in that person because we've established that relationship that, if they get off the rails, I'm very forward with my communication expectations when I start talking to a borrower. And I think that's something a lot of borrowers and maybe newer private lenders don't really have a conversation about. Like, I want to have weekly updates during renovations. I would like to see pictures. I want to know when the property hits the market in MLS. I want to know when it's under contract. I want to know when you're supposed to be roughly closing. Like, keep me up to date on what's going on the property. And it's fine. Yeah, I understand people hit snags, roofing material is, backlogged, or, getting lumber has been a problem, whatever it is, just be upfront with me and say, hey, the project's 2 weeks behind and here's the reason why. So if you have that very clear expectation, you don't necessarily, in my eyes, need to rely on that like monthly payment to come in for, that reassurance that, hey, this loan is performing because it's local to me. If I wanted to, I could drive by the property and take a tour. I don't want to because I don't want to be that active, but I could.
Yeah.
I talk to the borrowers, on a weekly basis. We probably see each other at virtual networking events, or we'll see each other at live events now that they're starting to happen again. So it's a completely different relationship. It's almost like partnering with someone, but you're not on title with the property.
Okay, so it's not like you owe me money, fool. It's all right.
Yeah,
I'll fund it. You get your money based on what it sells for. I get my money based on a rate that we agree on. But
yep,
in either way, both you are unsuccessful if the project doesn't get finished. Correct. So
exactly.
I'm pretty sure the last thing you want is to have to recoup a house that's mid flip, right? So
Yeah, no.
so you said 4 to 6 months. You don't make them. You don't make your borrowers pay any monthly payments. It's all handled at the close. So that works for them because when you say at close, is that at the sale of the property or okay? So you
Yeah, because
could if
I only fund fix and flip. So essentially their retail buyer is paying their interest for them.
yeah. Okay. So for them, it's very low risk so long as the project is successful.
Yes. Yes.
Right. Okay. All right. And so there's no what interest rates are you typically like? What's the range that you're charging?
I would say, in general, private lending is going to be anywhere between 8% and honestly 20%. If you're in a second lien, it's very common to see something in the teens up into the 20% if you're lending in the gap funding, position in that second lien position. Points generally range anywhere from I've seen 0 to 5. I think 2 is pretty typical.
Okay. And so can you explain what you mean? Like what's a scenario in which somebody would need the second lien and why would they go private money for it?
Yeah. So I think this is going to become even more of an issue moving forward during COVID because forbearance, that started about a year ago, usually is only about 12 months long. So a common situation where someone would need a second lien for investment property that they are fixing and flipping would be if they took that property subject to from the seller, the original conventional mortgage holder, seller, and then they want funds for obviously there's enough equity in the deal to do this, but they want funds for renovations, maybe holding costs for that first lien, whatever it happens to be. And then they have capital available to them to do that renovation on that property, but they didn't necessarily have to do any of the qualifying for the first mortgage. There are some hard money lenders that will allow a junior lien behind them, but they're kind of far and few between. So if anybody's considering doing second mortgage, they really need to get a really good idea of who that first lien holder is. Do they allow second mortgages in the first place? Because technically, in some places, I've seen some notes from a hard money lender where if the borrower takes out a second mortgage, they're technically in default. So they could foreclose on that property even if the property's, fully paid for every month. But because the borrower didn't stick to the terms of the promissory note, they're technically in default.
You can call it due on them, huh?
Yep.
Dang. Okay. So you said the when you loan, do you lend for renovation expenses as well?
Yes.
Okay.
And
And
then
do you have a draw program, or like how do you manage all of that?
I would say the first loan is what I tell borrowers is the first loan is going to be the most complicated and the most expensive. But then once we have established kind of that rapport, we know what's going on, we know how to work with each other, then it gets subsequently easier. But what most private lenders do, if they do lend on renovations, they do what I call as a refund draw model. So the investor is going to go out and put on a roof, $7,000 for a roof, maybe $2,000 for some other stuff. They are going to supply a paid invoice, a mechanic's lien waiver, and say, look, I put on a roof and I did these $2,000 worth of this other stuff. And then the lender will basically contact the title company where the loan was closed and say, okay, I'm authorizing to release, $9,000 to the borrower. And basically all the funds are held or transferred through escrow. So they are not going to closing. And if they have a second lien, for example, they're not going to closing and then leaving closing with a $50,000 check, because there's nothing that stops them from just having the greatest weekend of their life in Vegas with my $50,000 check. Whereas if you do a refund draw model, you have a little bit more control because you're not going to be upside down in that property. So if there's, $50,000 kind of being held at the title company and they're getting refunded as the work is progressing, then theoretically you're keeping that equity buffer as the property's improved.
So do they need to have a credit line with material vendors up front, or is it something they basically, this is common practice? They go to, like, say it's Home Depot and say, this is what I need, this is what we did, this is who's going to pay for this, and like how does that work where they get the stuff up front and then you pay for it?
They can do anything from a credit card to, they might have a certain amount of capital. So, for example, I had one borrower that kind of recycled the same $10,000. So they would start off the project with their $10,000, order supplies and materials. Once the materials were installed, like kitchen cabinets, for example, is usually what the first thing to go in. So they would order the kitchen cabinets, order the countertops. Once those were installed and put in, and then obviously the invoices are paid and we see the paid invoices, then we say, okay, title company, release $10,000 to borrower. And then he goes and recycles that $10,000 again and just kind of does the project in stages.
That makes perfect sense. And is there any flexibility with that? As like, if like you said, the first one's going to be complicated, but as it goes on, somebody you know and trust, will you increase that amount that they're able to draw from and recycle?
Oh yeah, like I've done loans in the second lien position, it's like their third loan from me, and I'll just give them all the capital up front. And I'm like, we have a history, you have your own GC crew, you get the projects done in a short period of time. Just me having that, draw process does nothing but slow them down.
Yeah,
And we
yeah.
have a successful history of it, then sure, here it's still going through closing, it's still going through a title company, we're still getting, title insurance, lender's title insurance on everything. It's still quick and easy, and they will leave closing with a check, but it's something where we've established that relationship. We have a history of working together. They have a track record of being successful and, managing my capital in their project.
How quick does it take you to make a decision on whether or not you're going to lend to somebody on the first time, and then times after that?
I'm a pretty slow decision maker. Like I'm happy to talk to people and get to know them, but I really want that kind of relationship established. Like I'm going to Facebook stalk you. I'm going to call three people. You provide me with three professional references. I'm going to call them and have a nice conversation with them. And then I'm going to ask them for, hey, do you happen to know anybody else that's worked with this individual, on some previous projects? I'd love to talk to them. And so I need some level of comfort but at the end of the day, if I'm wiring you $150,000, I need some sort of assurance that you're, a stand-up individual. You're gonna, you have some level of self accountability that you're gonna communicate, routinely and openly with me. And I don't think you can get that from an initial, 1 hour phone call.
Yeah, I agree. So, what's the quickest turnaround you've had, if you had to throw a number out there?
We had a week because we had a borrower where his contract fell or his lending fell through. He had a hard money lender kind of lined up, And then at the last minute, the lender's like, no, there's this one piece of criteria that we don't like, and we won't lend on it. And his contract is expiring. So we turned around and got the job done in about a week, a little less than a week, but he already had title. Usually the holdup tends to be title, because we obviously have to make sure, we have to look at the title report, make sure title's clear and that there's nothing there that's, we don't like some exception, there's not some massive, the neighbor's garage isn't half built on the property, stuff like that, that's going to show up in title, any encroachments, exceptions, things like that. So in most cases, title tends to be the thing that slows stuff down.
That's what's slowing us down right now, because we had a 7-day close, but the title company is going to take longer than that. So
Yeah.
luckily on this in particular property, we've got what seems like a good seller who wants to get paid. I've had bad sellers in the past who we were 2 weeks from actually being able to close. The delays were because the seller he was his own road bumps, speed bumps, like kicked our inspector off of the roof mid inspection. Like I'm telling you, crazy. And then what we found out though is the contract end date is the contract end date, regardless of what the due diligence timeline is. So when we came to, hey, the bank has agreed to close in 2 weeks, the seller said, I'm not waiting another 2 weeks. Guess what? Property's still on the market today, because I'm guessing he gets in his own way with everybody. And so I started with my brother and another guy who's a partner with me in real estate, a baseball business where we throw baseball tournaments in the Southeast. And because my brother was the head name on it, and my wife and our partner Brandon, I was able to go on the weekends and like run tournaments with them and make a pretty good amount of cash. But nobody ever really knew what I was doing. They just assumed I was going back to Louisiana. But now, like I said, screw it, dude. What are they going to do to me? I got my face all over the internet. I started putting my name out. Like if they decide that that stuff is my priority, like I still go to work every day. So it's not. But since putting my name out there, and I've noticed you've got like 4,500 members in your Facebook group, like that's pretty impressive. The reason I got this hotel brought to me was because the people that I grew up, like this girl was in my wedding, had no clue I was investing in real estate, but I put a Facebook page, just pretty much had like some picture that I didn't even own of some apartment complex I've never seen, and said, I invest in apartment complexes. If you're interested to learn more, let me know. Well, she hits me up and she's like, I don't have an apartment complex, but my mom really wants to sell her hotel. And I'm like, I like hotels. so, but because they brought that to me off market, a true off market deal, which doesn't happen as much as people like to act like it does. Was able to work with them. No real estate agents involved, so saved each of us a good amount of money. And she's like happy to sell it to me because she wanted, you tell they put a lot of their heart into that place. They want somebody who's going to buy it and keep it going, because she lives a couple blocks from the place. So for her to see it every day, she didn't want to sell it to somebody who's going to turn it back into a bank or a restaurant or something. It was important to her. She's actually, I think her husband passed. That's why she's selling it. But I think they were like the mayor of this little bitty town that's in Lake Arthur, right? So like she wanted to see it, it'd be a legacy. And I said, I'll do that. I'll keep it what it is because it's working. So
No, exactly. And it's unique and it's awesome looking.
yeah, and it's starting a Facebook group as well. It's just we got 220 something members, but I wanted to start a podcast. The only reason I started a podcast was to meet people like you. However many listeners I get, I don't care. Right? That's not the priority. The priority is having a venue for us to have, chats, get to know each other, learn from each other, and then have a way of recording it so I can, for my own knowledge. But I might as well share it with other people. But since starting that Facebook group, because whenever I wanted to get on podcasts to get my name out there, I was feeling like I was having to sell myself to everybody. Like, hey, my name's Ramsey. Here's my bio. Please have me as a guest. Ever since I started the Facebook group, it's like people are like, hey, can I be on your show? Show? We haven't even posted our first. Yeah, you can. I paid like $90 for this logo. It looks like, you know what I mean?
I mean, the group that I have, started 100% as a fluke. So
Really?
during COVID, the nice thing about private lending is it's fairly passive. So I was investing in real estate, but stuck home during COVID. And as an extrovert stuck inside, you get stir crazy very quickly. And so I went out looking for community. And there's Facebook groups for landlords, and there's Facebook groups for short-term rentals, and there's Facebook groups for burring. But every single group I joined that had something to do with private lending, private money, or hard money lending was basically a place for scams and spam. It
Yeah.
wasn't a legit educational group. And I was joking around with somebody here locally, and I was like, I can't believe this. There's no group out there like this. Like, there's got to be other people doing this. And they said, why don't you just start your own? And I'm like, I'm a chemistry professor. What do I know about like marketing and graphic design and, CRM management and all of this? And they're like, yeah, just start it. So I did. And then about a week later, I had 100 people in it. I was like, oh, crap. Now I have to do something with this. And the group's not even a year old yet. And it just took off like wildfire. And it just kind of became its own life, its own full-time job. And I've met some just absolutely amazing people through it. And I know people who have met lenders, like active investors who have met lenders through the group. I've met lenders from all over the country in the group. I know an investor. She lives in Australia, but she invests in Ohio, and she's a private lender. She's a U.S. citizen living in Australia, but invests in Ohio because that's her market. And it's just one of those things where it's a type of investing that it suits a certain type of personality. If you like having that geographical freedom, that time freedom, you're collaborative and accountable, then this might be the way of investing for you.
I like your marketing. I think it's good. Like your posts are. I think we have the similar style and color preferences. All like everything of mine is
Purple,
or
green, and
fuchsia.
gold.
Yeah, Mardi Gras. Yeah, there you go.
That's the only colors that matter. It's purple, green, and gold. And everybody, if you ever see the logo for my business, it almost looks like a Mardi Gras mask. Actually, it's here on my little. I don't know if you can see
Yeah.
it.
Oh yeah, it does. Yeah, little.
It's purple, green, and gold. And it's got a little house and it's the infinity symbol. And the graphic designer I hired, she's like, these are just like the hardest colors to get to go together. And I'm like, really, they're not. You're just not you're
Yeah.
not from where I'm from. Like that's literally on everything where I'm from. So just make it purple, green, and gold.
Yeah, people been building floats out of that and tossing beads out of that for ages. It'll work. It'll
Right.
work. That's great. Yeah. So I just joined the group the other day, and I do what you're saying is 100% true because I actually have a go-to GIF now that is that what they're called, GIFs, that
Yeah.
whenever I see a lender, it starts out 5%, 5%, 100% financing, 5% interest, blah blah blah. I prime that thing up. Oh man, this is a fraud. And I'll go onto their Facebook page and I'll scroll down, and in the first few it'll look like a picture of some American looking guy, and then
Yep.
the next thing will be a couple posts about real estate. But then you go to their likes, and it's like I checked into Nigeria and Sudan and all these. I'm like, no, this is not true. Like, and there will be people dropping their emails in there, like, hit me up,
Yes.
hit me up, hit me up. So that's every large multifamily Facebook group. I've seen that, and I try and call them out and get the admins to remove them because I've not my wife has been scammed over the internet before. We lost like $4,000 because of, right when the internet I guess was coming out, there was somebody who hit us up and we were gullible to a some overseas internet scam. And I'm now on high alert. Like, you ain't getting me, dude. Unless I'm on a face-to-face call with you and I can see you, you ain't get $1 out of me. So
I
I
mean,
guess
it happens, and that's part of the problem I think with private lending is there's not a lot of education out there on either side, on the borrower side or the lender side. Because you think about bigger pockets, how big bigger pockets is. They have books, dedicated. Get your first apartment building in 30 days. Here's how to be a landlord. They have books on, how to price out your scope of work for a rehab. But anytime private lending's mentioned, it's go find a private lender to fund your deals. And then nothing, like there's nothing past that point. So, and there's not even really any great books, out there about private lending just because there's so many nuances and state specific laws, it's really hard to write, kind of that universal how to go to manual for something like this. But originally, the intention of the group was to be just for private lenders. But when I started talking with more active investors like yourself, I kept hearing that same story. They didn't know that, what scams look like. They didn't know how to have a conversation with a private lender. They didn't know what the expectations were for a private lender. I mean, still routinely to this day, I get random messages on Facebook Messenger. Hey, what's your rates? Dude, it doesn't work like that. That's,
Yeah.
that's not what private lending is at all. So we opened the group to active investors, and a lot of active investors have actually, have interest in doing this kind of as a side hustle, like I mentioned with the self-directed IRAs. And, it's been a just really great kind of mixing pot of, when we have those daily discussions, we have the active investor mindset present as well, because they'll post on there, hey, as a borrower, this is what I see, or this is what I think, or this is what I'd like, or this is what I'd prefer. So the discussion is actually almost a kind of a peek behind the curtain for active investors to say, hey, this is what private capital is looking for. This is what they're saying. This is what they need. This is what they want to see. And then they also get a voice to say, hey, look, as a borrower, this is what I don't like. This is what I do like. Or why do you guys do this? Or why do you guys require draws? All of this. Why do you make draws so difficult? All of these things. You can start that open line of communication between borrower and lender. And I think everybody then has more realistic expectations of the relationship moving forward.
So is everything negotiable when it comes to private lending?
I would say for the most part, it's negotiable. I mean, the funny thing, that's how the whole like, hey, what's your rates really irks me. That's like my number one thing that people do in lending that just irks me when they contact me, because there are so many other terms that could be more beneficial to you as a borrower other than interest rate. So, for example, going back to our conversation about, just paying the interest at the end when you sell the property. So, if you're talking about, say, even a $50,000 loan, if you did a second mortgage with me, a $50,000 loan, the difference over 6 months on a $50,000 loan between paying 10% and 12% is next to nothing.
Yeah.
But they're going to sit there and they're going to shop around for that cheapest interest rate. But they might get another lender to say, oh, yeah, we'll do 10%, but it's going to be 5 points up front. It's going to be a $600 processing fee, and it's going to be a $300 underwriting fee. But they're happy paying their 10%. Whereas if they had built a relationship with me and had a conversation and said, look, I'm going to be, 12 or 14% for a second lien, but here's what I'm willing to do. We can put in an extension, we can do this, we can do that, we can do no payments. That ultimately might end up being far better a loan product for them and their situation, but they're solely focused on the interest rate. They're not looking at the other terms, the payment frequency, when it's due, how easy or hard would it be to extend, all these different variables that can be, more beneficial to them in the long run, but they're so focused on that. What's your rate? What's your rate? What's your rate thing?
And that makes sense. So a quick question for you, let me break this down for anybody who is listening to this that's kind of unfamiliar with some of the terminology. 1 point up front is essentially 1% of the loan that gets paid regardless of when you pay it back. Is that another word for early payment penalty, or is that just essentially, I don't care if you pay it back tomorrow or you pay it back at the end, I've got to make at least this much percent over the course of the loan plus the interest? Or is that kind of the checks and balances for how long, like I guess your payment for doing the loan, going through all the paperwork and everything like that, and then the longevity of the loan, how long your money is out. The interest rate is what you feel comfortable lending at, but those upfront points kind of make sure that you make some money on the loan regardless when they pay it back. Am I correct in saying that?
So there's going to be different vocabulary is going to be for different things. So origination points are paid usually at the origination of the loan. So at closing, the borrower is bringing, 2% of the loan amount to the closing table just for the origination. A lot of times origination goes to pay for the lent. If you want to think about it from terms of goods and services exchanging hands, the origination points are going to be paying for the lender's time in evaluating the deal, wire funds, all the kind of due diligence process, me making phone calls to your professional references, all of that is basically paying for. That's how I would view it, is paying for my time and doing all of that.
Okay.
As far as early prepayment penalty, that's a little bit more, what I usually see on the private capital side is they will say a guaranteed interest of 3 months. So no matter when you pay off the loan, the payoff statement is going to require, or is going to include, at least 3 months of interest has been paid. So
Okay.
that's usually what I usually see, is some sort of guaranteed interest, in terms of months, or potentially just a flat. If it's a really small loan like Jaspreet's Market, a lot of his loans are on the small side. So 1%, of $50,000 is $500.
Yeah.
He's not going to roll out of bed for $500.
Yeah.
So, and in that case, it might just be a flat, this is what it's going to take in order to make this loan work for me, because the amount of risk I'm taking on as the lender, dishing out $50,000 is more than $500 in my eyes. So they might have some other arrangement that way.
Okay, and I'm guessing the smaller the loan, the you see more points, higher interest, stuff like that. The longer the loan, not longer, the higher the loan, the longer the loan is out, you could potentially negotiate down interest rates, stuff like that, because now there's a longevity to it. It's not just some quick turnaround. Is that kind of how a lender would look at things as far as fluctuating the terms and negotiating the deal?
I would say for most lenders, it really boils down to experience and their relationship with that borrower, and also lien position. So obviously, if you're in a first lien, that's less risky. So it's going to be a lower interest rate, versus being in a second lien position. That's always going to be a higher interest rate. So I would say it really boils down to what is their experience level with doing the type of project you're funding. So for example, if someone comes to me and says, "Oh yeah, I have 5 rental units," and now they're here trying to buy this property that they're going to fix and flip. 5 rental units, when you start digging in, if they bought all 5 of those as a turnkey rental, they have zero rehab experience, even though on paper, yeah, they're a real estate investor, yeah, they own investment property, but they've never done a rehab. So for me, that's far riskier, even though kind of on paper they have quote unquote experience. So it really boils down to what is their experience in the type of project you are funding.
Now, if a team comes to you and there's a guy with, like, say that person wants to get into fix and flips, would it be advisable to them to get with a general contractor or somebody who has done fix and flips in the past? Now we're part of a team to buy down the risk in your eyes.
Yes, as long as those individuals are willing to personally guarantee on the loan, then absolutely. We've had a situation where a borrower was very inexperienced in doing fix and flips, new to this area, new to this market, but they had an advisor who was someone I personally trusted. That's actually how we connected. And they were willing to sign on the dotted line for that particular borrower. And we said, okay, sure. If we have faith in this individual and his advisor, and we've done loans with his advisor before, but this new kid's coming in town and trying this, but he's willing to sign on the dotted line for this new kid, then to me that speaks volumes. So again, going back to building those relationships in whatever market you want to work in is just vital.
It makes sense. That's kind of like a sponsor on a syndication where they
Hmm.
might not have equity in, or they might not be putting any of their money in, end up with some equity just because their name goes on the deal, in which lenders will trust their experiences. And now your name's on the loan, so if things go south, you're the guy who has to fix it. So
Yep.
that makes perfect sense. Okay, so what else? What else you got outside of lending that you guys do in real estate? Do you have rental properties? Do you look at multifamily, short term rentals? Tell me a little bit about your
We
real estate experience.
we do short-term rentals. So I do co-hosting, and then we also own short-term rentals. And then I am also part of a team that's standing up a Regulation A plus fund to help military members, both veterans, active duty, and their families invest in multifamily real estate. And then we are also using that fund to partner with either veteran or active duty operators in the multifamily space to kind of provide capital and advisement and kind of oversight for their projects as well.
Ooh, I'm an active duty military guy who's
I
hacking into the space.
know.
Look at that synergy. Oh man. Oh man.
I
So
thought you would like that.
a fund, because this is something that the guys I went and visited in Virginia, Jonathan and Vadim are doing, is putting together a
Yep.
fund. One of the things that kind of scared me about a fund, and maybe you can help me understand it a little bit better, was if somebody, let's just say, Joe Schmo military guy has 20 grand and he wants to put it to work. And you've got this fund and you're the fund manager, and he goes to the fund and the fund says, we can earn you an average of like 6% return, right? And he says, okay, well, that's a lot better than I can get in the savings account. It's better than the TSP is doing, whatever it is. And he invests. Now, if you're the fund manager just getting started and you don't have any properties, how are you paying that 6% back to those folks the moment that they pay into it? Or do you have to have a project lined up that you are now funding that pays 6% back? Last question. I don't know why I do this. I throw like 3 questions out there, but I like to let you just go off on it. What if somebody just invests like $1 million in this fund and you don't have 6% worth of return for that person on that $1 million? Or is it, oh, well, I got $1 million, I'm gonna go shopping for returns? So take the wheel on that word vomit that I just gave to you.
So there's a couple different, obviously, the yield is definitely a worry. So a couple things you can do. So funds can be structured any way that obviously legally is allowed. So for example, for our first fund, since the 2 key managers have done syndications before, they're familiar with it. They just haven't closed anything under the fund name. The fund itself does not have properties, like you mentioned. So in that case, what we are doing is the first fund is actually what we call a growth fund. So they are actually getting all of their returns at the end of their hold time instead of through periodic payments, on a monthly or quarterly basis. So that in essence buys us a little bit of time to get those properties, acquired, get them stabilized, get them producing the income that is then going to be in return, returned back to those passive investors in the timeline that they chose. So they can choose 5 years, they can choose 8 years, they can choose 3 years, and the return obviously goes along with the timeline that they chose.
Okay, so can if I say, all right, I want to put my money into this fund at a 6% return for 3 years, does that compound?
In our case, it does not, but in some, it really depends on the fund itself is 100% unique to that operator and to that fund. So that's why it's really important to dive in, just like you would have in a syndication where they have a private placement memorandum and a subscription agreement that kind of outlines all the little legalese and details of that particular deal. It's the same way with a fund. It's just called an offering circular and a subscription agreement. So you'll read through and try and see kind of, for example, if syndications to come from a syndication background, if you have a heavy lift, chances are you're not going to be doing quarterly distributions from a heavy lift off the get go. You're going to kind of prime your investors and say, look, we have a 3x multiple, but you're not going to see any distributions in year 1 at all while we have the property under construction. We're getting occupancy back up. And they're okay with that because they knew from the very get go that this was maybe an equity play as opposed to a cash flow play. Whereas there's other operators that go out and buy stabilized assets. Maybe they're a little turnkey. Maybe you just have to go in and do a little bit of a hard turn on 25% of the units, but you are getting distributions from day one. So you're kind of baking that business plan and that business where you are in the business cycle for your business, whether you're a startup, whether you're established, into how you're offering the fund, same way you do in a syndication.
So whenever somebody goes to invest in a fund, are there left and right limitations on what you can do with that fund? Like, so if somebody's investing saying, hey, look, Alex is doing syndications with this money, we're basically putting money into a pot for her to draw from because she has access to these deals that she can provide a return. But you're also very good at lending private money. So if the syndication deals dry up, can you turn around and say, I'm going to lend some of this money on private money that's going to give a 10% return, and that guarantees that I can give you a 6% return? Or is there legality saying, no, you can't cross streams like that? You have to invest the way that people intended their money to be invested whenever they signed up for the fund?
It really goes back to that documentation. So the offering circular, if the offering circular is something that's a little more of like a blind real estate fund, a blind pool that says, these operators are investing, in real estate, have a nice day. That leaves the door wide open to what those particular operators or fund managers could potentially, do with that capital. Now, whether you're going to get a whole bunch of investors to sign off on the dotted line is a different story. So you want to walk that line where you want to have a pretty solid business plan. You want to prove, have history and knowledge that you can get the returns that you're promising these passive investors, but at the same time, leave enough wiggle room where if you need to pivot, in a time where multifamily is going for historically low cap rates, if you need to pivot into something else to chase yield or, get a little bit of a premium, you have kind of the leeway to do it. So again, it really falls back on the uniqueness and variability of what the fund is actually structured to do, what their legal docs say you can legally do.
Is a fund a guaranteed return or a projected return?
It's going to be projected return. It's an investment like any other investment. So if anybody ever comes up to you and says it's a guaranteed return, they're lying through their teeth.
Because that's a loan, right?
Yeah.
How much does it cost to start up your own fund?
That really depends on the type of fund. So there's multiple types of funds. You could technically do a fund through the 506 route, what most people consider syndication. You could actually do, a debt pool fund, for a 506B or a 506C. So that would have a similar startup cost as it would for a syndication. I would say anywhere between $10,000 and $20,000, depending on, the docs and your attorney. Just from the legal perspective, the CF funds are generally a little more expensive. I would say anywhere between $20,000 and $35,000 from what I've seen from attorneys, just to set up the CF fund, get all the paperwork and stuff squared away.
What's a
Regulation, crowdfunding. That's what
CF fund?
Jonathan and Vadim are doing.
Okay.
And then Regulation A plus is by far the most expensive, and you're easily looking at just attorney's fees. You're easily looking at about $60,000. You have to do blue sky filings, which are generally anywhere between $12,000 and $25,000. You have a pretty big marketing budget. It's quite easy to end up at the $250,000 mark in expenses, even before you accept any investor capital.
What is a Reg A like? Are those things that I'm seeing on Facebook where people are, hey, invest in real estate via this fund? Is that a Reg A fund, or would that be more of a Reg CF fund where they're marketing to?
Because Regulation CF does allow for public advertising with some caveats. Regulation A does allow for open advertising as well. 506C allows for, open-end advertising, but obviously they can only accept accredited investors. So it really depends on, and those aren't even the only ways, to raise capital. So it really depends on what type of fund it is.
Okay. So funds to me are seem like an awesome avenue, which is probably why you're starting one, because I like the idea of the money being available, and it's people buying into you as an investor, saying, "Look, I don't know I got money, I don't know what to do with it. You look like you know what to do with money. Here's some money, go do something with it, and here's what you project as a return." And right now, I really do think a lot of people, especially if like whenever we're talking to friends and family, grew up, I don't have a lot of, especially being in the military too, don't have a network of high net worth individuals. I don't think Louisiana has a network of high net worth individuals, right? Grew up around a bunch of broke people doing broke people things. But the whenever I talk to them about a syndication, they're like, "Man, this sounds great. This is a great return. How much do I need to invest?" And whenever I tell them, like, it's like a minimum of like $50,000, they're like, "What? Bro, like I have it, but I don't." You know what I'm saying? I'm not.
And that
Giving
is
it to you.
100% why we started this, because it started by an active duty service member, a veteran, and I'm a military spouse. Everybody on the team has something to do with the military. And obviously our network is going to be very military centric. So you have those same conversations with people. You're like, yeah, we're buying this apartment building, we're doing this, we're doing that. And they had closed on a couple deals during 2020 during COVID, and having to turn away and have those same conversations with people, it almost makes them feel like, well, why am I even going to try and invest in real estate if I can't even make the minimum for this one deal? So
Yeah.
we wanted to come up with a way that allowed them to basically be able to get the same benefits as investing in a syndication for $50,000, but for a lot less. So, for example, our fund minimum for the growth fund is $5,000.
Makes
So
sense.
that's a lot more. That's a lot easier pill to swallow when you're first starting out, just trying to learn what this whole real estate investing, passive investing thing is. Is $5,000 invested for 5 years going to change your entire financial outlook? No, but what it does do is changes your mindset, which can change your outlook.
As a fund manager, like the scenario I was talking about, where let's just say it's way more popular and you have way more money than you have deals for, and it's like a real problem. You can't feed the fund. Can you return money to the investors because you don't have enough? You don't have the ability to supply them with the return that you promised, or can you cap it off and say we're only collecting like $2 million because that's kind of the experience level that you have to be able to put into syndications right now? Is it flexible in that manner?
It is flexible in the manner of you can choose how much to raise. You can choose which state. So, for example, if you are from Louisiana, you want to help empower people in Louisiana to have a better financial legacy, then you could say, I'm only going to accept investors from Louisiana, for example. Same thing with any other state, whatever kind of demographic you wanted to do.
It'd be a
The
horrible route.
limitations, well, come on, hypothetical here. But there are limitations for what you can overall raise, but those are dictated by the type of fund you choose. So, for example, CF funds, I believe they're tapped out at $5 million, and then Regulation A plus actually just got a boost from 50 million to 75 million. So you can actually raise up to 75 million in 12 months. If your marketing team is good enough and your managing team is good enough, they can place 75 million dollars. Go for it. So I don't foresee that being necessarily an issue because there's opportunity. It's having that growth mindset versus the scarcity mindset. So if you go in going, oh, I'm never going to find 8% returns on a regular basis, then your brain is going to prove yourself right and you're not. But if you walk in with, oh my God, there's all this opportunity, how am I ever going to raise enough capital for all these opportunities? You're going to keep seeing opportunity.
Fair enough. What who is who should start a fund, and what problems do they have that a fund can solve?
Who should start one? Crazy people. So the fund route, I think it's kind of the fad, the romanticized. It's almost like it's the perception is that you're a syndicator that's grown up. You no longer have to worry about syndication because now you've grown up and become a fund. And I think that kind of belief is poorly placed and misguided
Okay.
because they have different goals and different abilities. And I don't think enough people take that into consideration. So, for example, syndication is tied to one property. So you are an operator with your GP team in that one property, and that might be fine. I mean, even if it's a good sized property, if it's 400 units, it's that one property in that one market. You just need to know that one property in that one market really, really well. If you are the operator of a fund and you are potentially operating in multiple markets across multiple states, you go from having to worry about 300 or 600 or 1,000 units. If you're talking about placing $50 million, that's potentially $100 billion worth of assets under management. That's a lot of worry. That's a lot. It's bigger is not always better. It
Yeah.
goes back to that lifestyle. So if you don't want the lifestyle where this is your full time, 80 hours a week, you're in asset manager meetings because you're responsible for 18 different properties across 6 different states, then fund is probably not your route to go. But if you would rather be on a GP team with maybe 6 properties and it's the same GP team, and you're good doing your 6 properties, you're running them really well, you enjoy doing the asset management, you have 20 hours a week worth of work for those 6 properties and that's the income level you want, then stick with syndication. I don't necessarily view it as fund is what you do when you grow up and grow out of syndication. I don't want to leave people with that assumption that you've become such a successful syndicator, you're now doing a fund. I just personally don't think that's a thing.
I'm not against fads, by the way. I'm doing a
Yeah.
juice diet as of this morning, and probably tomorrow I should stop podcasting because I'm going to be a different human. My wife's got me on a all juice diet she ordered online, and I'm about to turn into a dragon. But well, cool. So that makes sense why the guys out in Virginia that I talked to are starting a fund because I don't know. I'll ask him if this is something I should put on the podcast or not. But they were basically here's the risk that he was willing to take. His current portfolio is what he is selling to the fund to kickstart it at a reduced rate. He's losing a lot of equity, but he understands that the people who invest in his fund are going to be fed day one because his portfolio is essentially being sold at a rate of like, let's say it's a 6% return, knowing that he's collecting a 12% return. So he's cutting his equity in half to kickstart the fund. But his vision is that if the fund is successful day one, then the fund will grow and he'll be able to, like 10x or whatever the terminology is, whatever kids are saying these days, is worth it in the long run. I thought that was pretty admirable. And I was like, man, I don't know if I could cut everything that I've worked on now, could share it with people who have not worked on that to give them a return. Like, that's pretty awesome of him to do. And it's a very long-term growth mindset that would be something I'd have to overcome. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Oh, I just realized what time it is. I actually have a 1:30 meeting I have to run to.
Sounds good. I can wrap this up.
We just killed like a 90 minutes, like it was nothing.
The bathroom break didn't help, but yeah, that's glad I got to talk to you. Want to talk to you some more.
Yeah.
So yeah, I appreciate it. I will do the intro and all that stuff separately, and I don't know when these are going to launch, but I know you got to go, so I'll let you go.
Okay, perfect. It was great talking to you, and we'll catch up soon.
You as well, Alex. Take care.
All right, bye.
Thanks for listening to the Gorilla State Investing Podcast, where we give you the ground-pounding truth about what it takes to be successful in real estate. Learn more at realfocus.org/Gorilla State Pod.